You may now all be seated. His Excellency, the President of South Africa, Her Excellency, the European Union Ambassador to Eswatini, His Excellency, the United Nations Resident Coordinator to Eswatini, Representative of the Government of Eswatini, Chair of the Governing Council, Principal Jackie Otula, deputies, guests, students, all protocol observed, good morning. Your Excellency, I think I will only be able to continue if you tell me I can smile. I'm allowed to smile? Thank you so much. I feel calmer. I've never had this many cameras in my face before. Never, sir. My name is Kimi Bonya, and I'm an IB2 student here at Waterford Kamhlaba from Kenya, and I serve as the Operations Manager for Africa Week 2023. And this morning, I have the absolute honor of being your MC. On behalf of the UWC Africa Week team and the Waterford Kamhlaba community, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the keynote address by His Excellency Thabo Mbeki. Mr. Mbeki, welcome to Waterford Kamhlaba. This institution was founded in 1963 by Michael Stern as a multiracial school in direct opposition to apartheid. As I speak to you all this morning, the demographic of staff and students on this campus comprises of 67 nations ranging from Albania to Zimbabwe. In 1967, King Sobhuza II gave us the name Kamhlaba, stating that we are of the world. In 1981, Waterford Kamhlaba joined the UWC movement that makes education a force to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. Waterford Kamhlaba UWCSA strives to lay the foundation for its students to become responsible citizens who have the skills, knowledge, and sense of purpose to provide leadership in both Africa and the world. Your Excellency, the equipping of great leaders starts on this campus, and the execution to be those great leaders starts on this campus. UWC Africa Week is a representation of one of the many events that students lead. It is by this foundation that we have all gathered here, and my hope is that as we leave this campus today, we would have been fueled to continue to fight for justice in Africa as Waterford celebrates her 60th anniversary, and amass equipment to pursue this journey of Africa that is ever evolving. It is at this very point that I would like to invite Bo Young, who would give us an overview of Africa Week.
Thank you so much, Kimmy. Morning, everybody. My name's Bo Young, and I'm very honored to be a part of the Africa Week 2023 team. Africa Week started in 2015 by a Kenyan geography teacher who had this idea to celebrate Africa and really talk about the challenges and the opportunities that Africa has to offer. And so our purpose in having Africa Week is to have these discussions, whether that be as an African or someone seeing the continent for the first time, for our international students here as well. It's to celebrate the African continent, its people, its culture, and all it has to offer. We've been honored to have 9 Africa Weeks since its start, and this year we are very honored to have you as a guest. And we've had guests in the past that include Graça Michelle. And I take this as an opportunity to tell the students to really absorb what an amazing event this is and how hard our teams worked on this. This is Africa Week 2023.
Thank you so much, Bo, for summarizing Africa Week in the best way possible. That is Africa Week, Your Excellency. We hope you're pleased to be here. I'd now like to welcome Mrs. Jackie Otula for for welcome remarks as the principal of Waterford Kamhlaba. Mrs. Otula, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Kimi. Your Excellency, former President of the Republic of South Africa, Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, honorable ministers and senior government officials, members of the media, partners, friends, members of the WK Governing Council present, management, staff, and students, ladies and gentlemen, Sani Bonani. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Waterford Kamhlaba. It is an honor and privilege to welcome you on the occasion of Waterford Kamhlaba's UWC Africa Week 2023 Keynote Address. We are particularly delighted that this year's Keynote Address is delivered by someone that we all look up to. We draw inspiration from the former President of South Africa, President Mbeki, his articulation of a bold Pan-African vision and generation of ideas. Hence, we are very happy and graciously honored for him to have accepted our invitation to deliver this keynote address. UWC Africa Week is Waterford Kamhlaba's student-led initiative that accords students a platform to explore Africa, its challenges and opportunities. We are proud of our students who are not just waiting to be leaders of tomorrow, but rather taking the initiative of providing leadership at the present moment, while preparing to seize the future. This is what gives us fulfillment as a school, because it is consistent with our mandate of producing leaders for the African continent and, of course, the entire world. This year's edition of UWC Africa Week is very special in many ways. It takes place at a time when we are celebrating our 60th anniversary, and its keynote address is delivered by someone who has made significant contribution to the growth and development of the African continent and the world, former President Mbeki. Our school, established, as you've heard, in direct opposition to South Africa's apartheid system and its laws of racial segregation, many people did not believe that a multiracial school was a possibility in this corner of the world then, given the political developments at that time. And in 1963, that was not possible. Many thought so. 60 years later, this dream has been realized. We have over 600 young people representing over 60 different nationalities and taught by a cohort of highly qualified and committed staff. We humbly believe that our school is a benefiting venue for an event to explore the challenges and opportunities of the African continent. Given former President of South Africa, President Mbeki's well-accorded activism and leadership against apartheid, especially, our school could not be proud to have him on campus, and in Eswatini to deliver this keynote address in 2023. And once again, we want to welcome you to Waterford Kamhlaba. We hope you enjoy the magic of Kamhlaba today during this keynote address. Welcome, everybody, and I thank you.
Your Excellency, before we invite you on stage, Waterford is not Waterford if we don't play some music. So please allow our well-rehearsed, always prepared Marimba ensemble, always prepared Marimba ensemble to serenade you this morning, sir. I don't know how often that happens. Let us serenade you this morning. If I'm being very honest, I have never seen them more nervous coming on stage before. But only because you said we can smile, that's the reason why I'm smiling. I don't care about anything in this moment. It is at this very point that we would like to welcome Mr. Mbeki, up on stage. And it is such an honor that you would even accept our request. Sorry, I have just been corrected. Pardon me. Dr. Sibongile, we would like to welcome you up on stage. Please pardon me for that. And then we will welcome His Excellency. So just warm your seats, hey, and prepare.
Thank you. Your Excellency, President Thabo Mbeki, Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, members of the media, valued members of the Waterford Governing Council, much appreciated college management and staff, our wonderful students, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, a warm welcome. Mine is to welcome our keynote speaker, and I'll read through his bio. President Mbeki was born on June 18, 1942 in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. He joined the ANC Youth League in 1956 at the tender age of 13 and left South Africa for exile in 1962. President Mbeki read economics at Sussex University in England up to the master's level. He has been a member of the ANC National Executive Committee since 1975. He's married to Mrs. Zanele Mbeki. He was appointed Deputy President of South Africa in 1994 and twice elected President in the years 1999 and 2004. On September 23, 2008, he resigned as President of South Africa after being asked to do so by the African National Congress's National Executive Committee. He's currently the chairperson of the AU High-Level Implementation Panel for Sudan and South Sudan, the chairperson of the AU High Panel on the Security of the Horn of Africa, and the AU-UN High-Level Panel on Illicit Financial Outflows from Africa. In addition, he is also the chairperson of the board of the South Center, a think tank of the countries of the Global South. The South Center is based in Geneva, Switzerland. President Mbeki has previously facilitated peace negotiations in various African countries, including Lesotho, Zimbabwe, Burundi, the Comoros, Côte d'Ivoire, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Upon his retirement as the President of the Republic of South Africa, he set up the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, of which he is a patron. His role is to pursue the role of the foundation is to pursue the ideals of Africa's Renaissance, and through which he undertakes various activities consistent with these ideals. He's currently the Chancellor of the University of South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the wonderful pleasure to welcome on stage President Thabo Mbeki. Siyamukela.
It's okay. It's a bit too high. Let's lower it a bit. A bit more. Is that okay? Thanks. I can't see you. And the reason I can't is because there are these bright lights in front here. But thank you very much indeed for this warm welcome to Waterford Kamhlaba, and the chair of the school governing board. I know when people read introductory remarks like that about me, I normally stop them. The reason for it is because it normally discloses too many state secrets, including when I was born. But thanks for the introduction. I must say thanks a lot to the students, organizers, steering committee of the Africa Week. I am saying thanks for particularly giving a particularly difficult task. They wrote a letter to me, and it said, among other things, that this week is about its theme is a journey ever evolving. And it said that this year's theme aims to illuminate Africa's past, present, and future events as a holistic revolution, or rather an irregular pattern of events that cannot then be fixated on one definition of what Africa is. And said our theme speaks to the fact that Africa will always be under transformation in different forms and shapes. Now therefore, what I'm going to say to you, you see the complicated thing that they wrote to me, qualifies me for a doctorate. It's a challenging proposition, but I think correct. It's correct to pose it. I'm not saying that I'm the correct person to pose it to, but it is correct to pose it. What do we make of Africa? Is it a journey ever evolving? Is it towards a revolution? Is it towards the events that cannot be fixated as one definition of Africa? And the continent, they say, is always in under transformation, in different shapes and forms. And then they say, speak. So let me speak. You know, in the 19th century, some of the British missionaries in the Eastern Cape were finding it difficult to convert Africans into Christianity. So part of what they said then was that these Kafirs will perish as a people, will cease to exist as punishment for not agreeing to convert to Christianity as was expected. It was not a prediction, it was a threat. The first African to be ordained as a priest after the necessary training and all that in the Eastern Cape was Reverend Theo Soga. And those in the room who can sing will remember the hymn, Lizali Sitting Alako. That's Theo Soga's hymn. It's composed by him, both the music and the words. And this is what Theo Soga wrote in response to the threat that because the Kafirs were refusing to be converted, then the Kafirs will perish. And he said Africa was of God given to the race of Ham. I find Negro from the days of the old Assyrians downwards, keeping his individuality, his distinctiveness, and amid the wreck of empires and the revolution of ages. I find him keeping his place among the nations and keeping his home and country. I find him opposed by nation after nation and driven from his home. I find him enslaved, exposed to the vices and the brandy of the white man. I find him in this condition for many a day in the West Indian Islands, in Northern and Southern America, and in the South American colonies of Spain and Portugal. And I find him exposed to all of these disasters and yet living, multiplying, and never extinct. And here I find him now returning unmanacled to the land of his forefathers, and see therefore the Negro Republic of Liberia. I find the Negro in the present struggle in America looking forward, though still with chains in his hands and with chains on his feet, yet looking forward to the dawn of a better day for himself and all his sable brethren in Africa. And until the Negro is doomed against all history and experience, and until his God-given inheritance of Africa be taken finally from him, I shall never believe in the total extinction of his brethren along the continent, among internecine wars and revolutions, and notwithstanding external spoliation, and have remained unextinct, have retained their individuality, have baffled historians, and challenges the author of the doom of the African race is a satisfactory explanation. And he said, Ethiopia shall soon stretch her hands unto God. You know that particular psalm in the Bible. And he said that the total extinction of a people who form a large family of races, to whom the promise applies that Ethiopia shall soon stretch their hands to God, shall not surely precede its fulfillment. In this manner, I, for one, shall adhere to the declaration of the old book, because I cannot accept the theories of man. That was 1865. I think what's striking about that was this statement by the Reverend Theo Soga, talking about a common destiny for all Africans. We've all got a shared history of suffering, but we share a common destiny, Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora. That was the middle of the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, the first Pan-African conference, as all of you would remember, was held in London in 1900 and adopted a statement to the nations of the world. And among other things, it said that in the metropolis that was in London, so it was held in London, in the metropolis of the modern world, in this, the closing year of the 19th century, there has been assembled a Congress of men and women of African blood to deliberate solemnly upon the present situation and the outlook of the darker races of mankind. The problem of the 20th century, it said, is the problem of the color line. The question as to how far differences of race, which show themselves chiefly in the color of the skin and the texture of the hair, will hereafter be made the basis of denying to over half the world the right of sharing to the utmost ability the opportunities and privileges of modern civilization. That the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And this statement by the first Pan-African Conference was talking about the same thing that Theo Soga had spoken about in 1865, the common destiny of these people that were people described as a people with this common problem of the question of how far the differences of race, which show themselves chiefly in the color of the skin and the texture of the hair, will hereafter be made the basis of denying to over half the world the right of sharing to the utmost ability the opportunities and privileges of modern civilization. It was a definition like Theo Soga had done of a common task, a common challenge facing peoples of Africa and African descent, the African continent and the African diaspora. And then if we jump to the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, it adopted, the OAU at its founding adopted a charter, and it said, we, the heads of African states and government assembled in the city of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, convinced that it is the inalienable right of all people to control their own destiny, conscious of the fact that freedom, equality, justice, dignity are essential objectives for the achievement of legitimate aspirations of the African peoples, and conscious of our responsibility to harness the natural and human resources of our continent for the total liberation of our peoples in all spheres of human endeavor, and inspired by a common determination to promote understanding among our peoples and cooperation among our states in response to the aspirations of our peoples for brotherhood and solidarity in a larger unity, transcending ethnic and national differences. I'm suggesting that this charter of the Organization of African Unity adopted in 1963, it echoes exactly the same sentiment that Theo Soga had expressed and the Pan-African Congress had expressed in the year 1900. So you see this theme, which runs really for a century, about what is it, who are we, these Africans, and what are the challenges we face. And as you can see, it doesn't talk about the challenges on the Africans on the African continent, but Africans wherever they may be, both on the continent and the African diaspora. I will at some point talk about the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. But here is what that Agenda 2063, among other things, says. That Pan-Africanism emerged in the early 19th century as an important vehicle in the struggle of Africans and the peoples of African descent for emancipation and the restoration of their dignity and against slavery, colonialism, and all forms of racism and racial exploitation. It was founded on the conviction that Africans have a common history, a common destiny, emanated from ancient cultures and civilizations, and that Africa is the cradle of humankind. And it said the various strands of Pan-Africanism converged into the founding of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, in 1963, and were crystallized in the major objectives of the organization, captured in Article of the Charter. Now, I think in response to what the organizers of the Africa Week have said, a journey ever evolving, I think a very important message of that journey ever evolving is this identification of a task that faces the African people wherever they are. As this thing I've just read now from Agenda 2063, the Pan-Africanism. This is one of the outstanding products of that journey ever evolving. The recognition by the Africans, wherever they may be, is about saying that they share this common destiny. In the end, it gets spelled out about its essential features, get spelled out by the OAU in 1963. But it's the same story, whether in 1865 or in 1900 or 1963, this story. But in the journey, ever evolving, it produces this outcome, this consciousness. I think it's a very important part of our reality. That for as long as all of those years, there has been this consciousness among Africans, whether they're in Latin America or in the US or Brazil or in Swatini or whatever they may be. They say we're together, share a common destiny. But I think the question would need to be asked. This is indeed a very important achievement. It's an achievement which would continue to drive Pan-Africanists to this day. They are driven by the same phenomenon which was stated already in 1865. But the question that necessarily, I'm saying necessarily arises, that what have we done with that recognition? What has been constructed out of it? For instance, the African Union decided that the OAU and the African Union, when it started, was based on 5 regions of Africa: Southern Africa, East Africa, Central, North, West, West Africa. 5 regions. It's in the constitutions of these bodies. And then the AU, the African Union, said, no, but we have said we are just not just African people on the continent, but Africa in the diaspora also belongs here. And so it created a 6th region. And the 6th region was the diaspora. So that it should then be represented at ANC conferences, AU conferences. Sorry, at AU conferences, not ANC. At AU conferences and participate like we are Africans as defined by Theo Soga in 1865 and defined by the Pan-African Parliament, by Pan-African movement, the Pan-African Conference in 1900 and the OAU. But I think in answering the questions, therefore, what have we done in that journey evolving, having found this thing about our oneness as Africans, then what did we do about it? And I think it's when then the answer would come that we haven't quite done what we should have done. And therefore, we cannot say, as it was said, has this produced a revolution, a holistic revolution? No, it hasn't. Is it rather an irregular pattern of events that cannot then be fixated on one definition of what Africa is? I'm not sure that that would be a correct description of what has happened as a result of our discovering what I've indicated. But I think it's a very important first point to understand. This connotation of a common destiny that is shared by all Africans, wherever they are, however different their circumstances, but indeed they share a common destiny, and in reality ought to be acting together in order to define the content of that destiny. But I'm saying that not enough has been done to do that, to define the content of that common destiny. It's an outstanding matter, therefore, with regard to the question that was posed of a journey ever evolving, what has it produced? A holistic revolution or other? It has not produced a holistic revolution, but I wouldn't say that it is just produced an irregular pattern of events. But it does mean that more needs to be done. Now, of course, all of these things spoke about the liberation of the African people. In the 19th century, in the 20th century, the problem of the color line, this issue is about liberation. But of course, obviously, the other element to that liberation is not the political liberation only, but also it's the liberation from other things, like poverty and hunger, underdevelopment. That's an important part of that process of the liberation of these African peoples, all of them together. And interestingly, that matter arises in the agenda, in the resolutions of the 5th Pan-African Congress. The first one, as I told you, 1900, as you know, and the 5th one, as I said, was in 1945. And one important and interesting thing about the Pan-African Congress of the fifth one, 1945, was that quite a lot of the delegates were people who would become the first heads of state and heads of government on the continent. Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya was a delegate at the 1945 Pan-African Congress and became the first president of Kenya. Kwame Nkrumah was a delegate at the 1945 Pan-African Congress, and that's the first president of Ghana. So we had a lot of people like this. So what then happens in that 1945 Congress is that they say, yes, indeed, we fight for our liberation from colonial oppression and whatever. But what will happen when we've gained our independence? So they add another agenda to what is to be done with the fact that we are all of this, all Africans together with this common destiny. But what happens when we've gained our liberation? The power is now in our hands. And so, for instance, they took a resolution at the 5th Pan-African Congress on the economy of West Africa. And among other things, they said that there's been a systematic exploitation of the economic resources of the West African countries by imperialist powers to the detriment of the inhabitants. That the industrialization of West Africa by the indigenes has been discouraged and obstructed by the imperialist powers, with the result that the standard of living has fallen below subsistence level. That the land, the rightful property of the West Africans, is gradually passing into the hands of foreign governments and other agencies through various devices and ordinances. That the mining industries are in the hands of foreign monopolies of finance capital, with the result that whatever mining industry has developed, there has been a tendency to deprive the people of their land holding, e.g. mineral rights in Nigeria and Sierra Leone, which are now the property of the British government. So these are some of the things that the 5th Pan-African Congress, 1945, talks about, the economy of West Africa. It's a prelude to saying, when we are liberated, which is what we're fighting for, what do we do with that economy? Because on that economy depends all of these matters of the reduction of poverty, of underdevelopment, of having enough money to build schools and clinics and roads and all of that. So it becomes a very critical, important part of the African agenda. The liberation from colonial oppression, the liberation from oppression, from hunger, poverty, I'm saying becomes a very important part of that agenda. First identified by the 5th Pan-African Congress in 1945. So I think from now onwards, I'm just going to stick with this economy part of the journey ever evolving. Now, having been identified like this in 1945, these same people who I said were delegates at that 1945 Pan-African Congress, they become delegates at the founding of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. Because now they are leading independent African states. The 1945 delegates are now leading independent African states. Nkrumah, Kenyatta, others. And therefore, as you would expect, having talked about economic matters in 1945, they would ensure that the founding conference of the Organization of African Unity would talk about economic matters, which it did. So there's long resolutions adopted by the OAU on areas of cooperation in economic problems. And for instance, it says that the summit, meeting in Addis Ababa from the 22nd to the 25th of May 1963, and it says that the effect of unfulfilled promises of global development strategies have been more sharply felt in Africa than in other continents in the world. And indeed, rather than a result in an improvement of the economic situation on the continent, successive strategies have made it stagnate and become more susceptible than other regions to the economic and social crises suffered by the industrialized countries. Thus, Africa is unable to point to any significant growth rate, or satisfactory index of general well-being in the past 20 years. Faced with this situation and determined to undertake measures for the basic restructuring of the economic base of our continent, we resolved to adopt a far-reaching regional approach based primarily on collective self-reliance. It's a very important declaration taken by the Pan-African, by the Organization of African Unity at its foundation. But if you then look, you follow up on what was said about the possibility of establishing a free trade area between African countries, the establishment of a common external tariff to protect emerging industries, and setting up a raw material price stabilization fund, the restructuring of international trade, and so on. These are matters spelled out by the Organization of African Unity 1963. But if you follow that up, as I say, in that journey ever evolving, what then happened as with this economic tasks were set? Naturally, as would be expected, given what had been said in 1945 at the Pan-African Congress. What would have happened? As I say, in the journey ever evolving, did those decisions produce a holistic revolution? Or did they rather create an irregular pattern of events that cannot then be fixated in a definition of what Africa is? The reality is that the African countries did not, in fact, pay the kind of attention they needed to have paid to these economic tasks. They didn't. And we're looking at it from today, now. It's clear why. Because these are the independent states, many of them independent around 1960-62. They've just been established and they formed the OAU. And so there's a lot of challenges, as you know, in the formation of this independent African state. Too many military coups, too many one-party states. So people are grappling with this notion, what shall we do with this freedom that we've won? But also very, very important. they say to themselves, the process of decolonization is not complete. So we cannot say that now our only task is this economic development. The task from liberation from oppression remains. So that same conference, the founding conference of the OAU, for instance, adopted a resolution on decolonization. And it said that having considered all aspects of the questions of decolonization and unanimously convinced of the imperious and urgent necessity for coordination and intensification of efforts to accelerate the unconditional attainment of national independence of all African territories still under foreign domination, they reaffirm that it is a duty of all African independent states to support independent peoples, to support dependent peoples in Africa in their struggle for freedom and independence. And among other things, established a coordinating committee consisting of various countries headquartered in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, responsible for harmonizing the assistance from African states and for managing the special fund to set up for the purpose of achieving liberation. And so indeed, they paid a lot of attention to this matter, the liberation of South Africa or the Portuguese colonies and then all of that. But I'm saying, colleagues, that as a consequence of that, didn't pay enough attention to the matter of this economic development we need, and therefore the liberation of our people from poverty and underdevelopment. The consequence of that is that many years later, I'm talking after many years after 1963, the African Union had come back together to say, what do we do about the African economies? And so that resulted in the adoption of what was called the Lagos Plan of Action for Economic Development of Africa, 1980 to 2000. The plan of action that had been put in place in 1963 didn't work. So the African Union got together in 1980 and adopted this plan of Lagos Plan of Action for Economic Development of Africa to 1980 to 2000. Again, the question will arise, what then happened to that plan of action? This journey ever evolving. So the plan of action is adopted, Lagos Plan of Action, because nothing had happened with the previous plan of action. And it decided, one of the things it decided, the Lagos Plan of Action, that there should be agreed an African economic community, that all of us as Africans must come together into a formal body, which is the African Economic Community, by the year 2000. That's what the Lagos Plan of Action says. What happens is that the Lagos Plan of Action is very detailed about what needs to happen to the African economies. And then, as I said, it said there needs to be established an African economic community. As they adopted the Lagos Plan of Action, the African states, they said in so doing, adopting the Act of Lagos, we are conscious of the tremendous effort which will be required of us, individually and collectively, to attain the goals we have set for ourselves in these documents. We are confident that we have the determination to overcome the obstacles that may lie in our path, and that our organization and this General Secretariat will be able to enlist the active support of the international community as well as of the relevant international organizations. I'm very, very glad I was not in that meeting. To say I'm conscious of the tremendous effort that will be required of us. Because of course then you say this thing, it raises a question, all right, we'll watch you and to see what happens. Indeed, the question arose, what happened? The Lagos Plan of Action had said that there should be formed this African Economic Community by 2000. It was actually formed earlier in 1991. So again, it had become clear that between 1980 and 1991, the commitments that were made by these people who say we commit ourselves to do something, nothing had happened. So you have the African community, African Economic Community formed. And it says, the community document itself, we reaffirm our commitment to set up, it said we are briefed by 2000 on the basis of the treaty, that was in the Lagos Plan. On the basis of the treaty concluded an African economic community so as to ensure the economic, social, cultural integration of our continent. Not just economic integration, but social and cultural as well. And the aim of this community shall be to promote collective, accelerated, self-reliant, self-sustaining development of member states, cooperation among those states, and their integration in the economic, social, and cultural fields. So it was established, the economic community, to promote economic, social, and cultural development and the integration of African economies in order to increase economic self-reliance and promote an endogenous and self-sustained development. And to establish on a continental scale a framework for the development, mobilization, utilization of the human and material resources of Africa in order to achieve a self-reliant development. So on. I think you get the point about the African Economic Community. So it drafts an economic plan of action, because the 1980 Lagos Plan had not worked, basically. So then the journey is evolving. And so far, with regard to the economic matters, it is producing very well thought out plans of action. And you look at this very well thought out plan of action, take into account the commitment that we've made as leaders. And you look at it after a number of years, you say, it has not produced this outcome it promised. So let's do another plan. So I was saying 1991, there's a whole document on the African Economic Community, 1991. 2001, the OAU, this last summit of the OAU, adopts NEPAD, the new Partnership for Economic Development, African Economic Development. New Partnership for Africa's Economic Development, NEPAD, is adopted at the last OAU summit in 2001. It's yet another plan, economic plan. The 1991 didn't work. So let's have another plan. So we did one, adopted in 2001, NEPAD. And it said that the NEPAD is a pledge by African leaders based on a common vision and a firm shared conviction that they have a pressing duty to eradicate poverty and to place their countries both individually and collectively on a path of sustainable development and growth, at the same time participate actively in the world economy and the body politic. And the program is anchored on the determination of Africans to extricate themselves and the continent from the malaise of underdevelopment and exclusion in a globalizing world, and so on. And that NEPAD, adopted by the OAU in 2001, I'm saying it's adopted because the economic plan of 1991 hasn't worked. So we adopt another one. And a lot of work went into this thing. It was so important that we then insisted that the developed countries of the North, in terms of their economic relations with the African continent, those relations must be based on NEPAD. So they have got to be consistent with the objectives set in NEPAD, so that you don't have these big moneyed countries, wealthy countries of the North, intervening with their monies and imposing a level of a line of development on the continent which the Africans had not approved of. So they adopted in 2002 what was called the G8 Africa Action Plan. The G8 Africa Action Plan was based on the NEPAD. So you had this consistency, and as a result of which it was then decided to set up a joint committee of us, the Africans, and the G8, because it was said in writing that there must be a process of mutual accountability. That's a very strange notion, that these colonized countries are now saying to the colonial master, we must have mutual accountability. And so indeed we set up this committee to ensure that mutual accountability, so that every year we would say this is how far we've gone with our commitments, and they must say this is how far we've gone with our commitments. So work was going on. I don't want to spend too much time because I must stop talking now. And then 2013, the OAU, well, the continent celebrates the 50th anniversary of the foundation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. So this is 2013. So this discussion that then takes place is that as we celebrate these 50 years of the OAU, which now includes the African Union, let's look at the next 50 years. Where do we want the continent to be in 50 years' time? As a result of which there was adopted the current AU program, Agenda 2063. Now, Agenda 2063 it meant that there must be new economic action plan. So NEPAD is then transformed into a development agency, and there's a new African economic plan in terms of Agenda 2063. So which says many, many things. And it calls for, that's what it says. It says it calls for Africa to be, Agenda 2063, calls for Africa to be competitive, transform its economy from commodity dependence to one that is driven by manufacturing and industry, value addition, effective participation in the global value chain, as well as science and technology. And critical in this effort is the capacity to negotiate in all areas of African interest, most notably in trade, climate change, economic partnerships, and related areas. In addition, Agenda 2063 requires capacity in the new frontiers of science, such as biotechnology, genetic engineering, space exploration, deep sea mining, and a critical mass of trained engineers, doctors, technicians in a wide range of skills that is required to build Africa's infrastructure, to staff her factories and health centers and hospitals, and to empower the continent's development in all fields. That's Agenda 2063, that's what it calls for. So that by the year 2063, we will have this Africa, which is competitive and so on. Now, this is a journey evolving on the economic issues. This particular area which relates with the ways and means to defeat poverty, to defeat underdevelopment, to build schools, to build clinics, to build roads, and so on. The continent has focused on this matter continuously by producing economic action plans, which it doesn't implement. And then having done this action, number one, don't implement. In the end, come to a decision that this thing hasn't worked. Let's do another one. That's where we are today. So I'm saying, in terms of this journey ever evolving, we have a very interesting thing. That we begin as Africans. We begin by saying to ourselves, we as Africans, we've suffered all sorts of problems, but we share a common destiny as Africans in Africa and the African diaspora. And so let's work together to define that destiny. And that is work in progress. And then we say the matter of political liberation is critical, so let's focus on it, which we do. But this matter of extricating the masses of our people from poverty, also critical. Let's do something about it. But in the end, as we do something about it, I think we come to the conclusion that in that journey ever evolving, as Africans, certainly on the continent, we've shown a very, very good capacity for policy formation. Yeah. And very, very serious deficiency with regard to the will to implement. Now, I think as next Africa Week, next year, pick another element in terms of the African agenda. I've spoken here largely about the economic thing. There's an important challenge that this history poses to us, to pose the question to ourselves. Why do we seem to have no will to implement the policies we've elaborated? You have a consistent thing if you look at this economic thing. A consistent thing of economic plan after economic plan after economic plan. Because the plans, all of them coming from us, all of them. But all of them not working. To ask the question, what accounts for that behavior? Because it's not something that you can just remark about and pass on. because there are many, many other challenges. If you look at the Africa, the policy framework on the continent, there is no major issue on the continent on which there is no policy. Questions of women's liberation, questions about the right of the child, questions about culture, about higher education, about health, a great plethora of policy positions. But on the economic one, it's a succession of policies we agree and don't implement. Is it not the case with the other policies? That's why I'm saying that maybe next year, let's look at this question. Why do we demonstrate this capacity to formulate policy and right perspectives about Africa and the African diaspora? But when you ask, in terms of that diaspora and Africa working together, what have you done? And there'll be very, very few things you can count as things that have been done. If you look at this economic one, same. Therefore, I think we face a very, very serious challenge on the continent of the will to act on our own policies. The determination, the commitment, the capacity to look into the future to say this is where we want to be in 10 years' time, that capacity is there. And we do produce those plans. But somehow we never get there. What's wrong? There's something wrong about that. So in this journey, ever evolving, there needs to be a checkpoint as you journey along to say, we decided yesterday that today we'll be there. Are we there? That is not there. Those benchmarks are not there. But the journey is ever evolving. But thanks a lot. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, we are so honored that you would even accept our invitation and that you would share with us your words this morning. We will be executors of our action plan. We will execute. And we will start here at Waterford Kamhlaba. Our students are inquisitive. We have questions. 1 or 2 questions, Your Excellency. If you are willing, we would like to ask a few questions. And so we'd like to invite you back on the stand, sir. And we have questions ready to be asked. May I invite Benita, please?
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for starting up this very insightful conversation. I'll be representing an inquiry from the International Baccalaureate Year Group. What are your thoughts on how future African leaders, especially UWC students, should prepare for the dynamic, geopolitical future ahead for the purpose of the continued and sustainable advancement of the continent? What tools can you recommend?
You must answer that. Pose that question again. I can't hear very good. Don't hold the mic. Just hold the mic a little further. Yeah?
Okay.
Go on.
Sorry. Sorry about that. All right.
Come again.
What are your thoughts on how future African leaders, especially UWC students, should prepare for the dynamic geopolitical future ahead for the purpose of the continued and sustainable advancement of the continent?
Thanks. Is it one question?
I mean, yes, the follow-up was, what tools can you recommend for this?
Tools.
Yes.
Okay. That's the end.
Yes, that's the answer.
No, I think let's take a number of questions. Then I'll answer all of them together.
Thank you. Morning, Your Excellency.
Morning.
As the current Chancellor of the University of South Africa, what advice do you have to offer to UWC students who are pursuing tertiary education, be it in Africa or anywhere else in the world? What advice do you have on what impact they could make on the world?
Two more questions.
Good morning, Your Excellency. Sorry. My question for you today is, how is your view on the apartheid and how exactly can it help us Waterford students to advance in life?
Say it again.
What was your view on the apartheid? Apartheid.
View on
sorry.
apartheid.
Yes, apartheid. Sorry.
Okay.
And how it can help us UWC students to advance in life. Yeah.
Okay.
Good morning, Your Excellency. We would like to ask you, as students at a UWC, as the youth, how can we take the action right now, currently in our own spaces? Do you have any advice for us?
His Excellency, what is a crucial characteristic that a leader should have, and particularly in Africa?
Okay. That should be enough, no? On the first question that was asked, about the geopolitical future and so on, I don't know what I would say. I hope that Waterford Kamhlaba pays attention to what is described there as the geopolitics. What is happening in the world? Because the college, Swatini, are not an island. We live in this wider world. And so the students, I would hope, at UWC here, the students would want to be paying attention to the geopolitics of the world in order to be able to answer this question. So in order to be able to play play a role with regard to that geopolitics in future, I think to be educated about the geopolitics now becomes critically important. For instance, you will notice now that one of the big debates in the world is a big debate about the importance of multipolarity in terms of the exercise of power. A movement away from unipolarity to multipolarity. From a unipolar world to multipolar world. To multilateralism versus unilateralism. And ask yourselves as students here at Waterford Kamhlaba, why is there that debate now? What's brought it up? What is it about? It's an important question because it's an attempt to define how the world should be governed. Do we continue with a situation in which power, political power, economic power, security power, engineering power, science power, everything is concentrated in some place? So you have this unipolarity because power is in this one pole? Or should we have a multipolar system? What does that mean? What would its effect be? For instance, a debate, this discussion, because of the context, one of the matters that is being raised is this issue of de-dollarization. It's an inherent part of this whole debate. So I'm saying that I would hope that the students here at Waterford Kamhlaba are watching, even if this is not a subject on which you must write an exam at the end of the year or something, but to watch this thing about this geopolitical whatever, because it's very important understanding that we will be located, even as individuals. When you finish here, you go to some university somewhere and so on, you will be located within a geopolitical setting. So to understand it becomes important. But I'm saying the first step is that we here at the college should pay some attention to this thing. I'm mentioning immediately this matter about the debate about unipolarity, multipolarity, multilateralism, and so on, because it's a very important debate. And I'm sure that as you people qualify here, in 2 or 3 years' time, you will see a world that is changing. And what role you play in that world will depend on how much you've understood the issue while you were here. That would be my advice. And what tools you would use, I don't know. The best tool, I think, is your head. With regard to universities, Africa, elsewhere, and so on, I think it's very, very important to, as students, really to be exposed to all different cultures, different worlds. And I think let me tell you a little story. Once I was invited by the youth of Tanzania. They had a retreat over a weekend, and they said, could I come? And so I went, and and what they were saying is basically that, look, we were educated people. Me, I'm a university lecturer. That one is an accountant. That one is an advocate, lawyer. That one is a mathematician. And inevitably, we'll be the leadership of Tanzania in another 5 to 10 years. There's a problem that's arisen in our own heads as this youth. We've got all of these qualifications, and basically we don't even need to stay in Tanzania. But I can get a job as an accountant anywhere in the world, and so on. The problem we have, they say, is at this retreat of theirs, they had invited the older generations, the veterans of the independence struggle of Tanzania. And they said, you see, these are the veterans of our struggle who don't even know how to operate a cell phone. Technologically, they belong to the past. They can't teach us anything in terms of the skills we have. But they have a value system. We do not have the value system they had. Because many of them were teachers and were ready to be expelled by the colonial power because of their engagement in the struggle for the liberation of Tanganyika. And so they were expelled, and all sorts of things happened. And they brought us our liberation because they were driven by a particular value system. It's a value system we don't have. We have the skills. But what will we do with Tanzania when we become? There was a young woman there, and she says there had been a congress of the Youth League, and she had stood for election as one of the officials and was defeated by a young man. But she's a member of the National Executive Committee nevertheless, but not an official. But she was defeated. And she says, and I was defeated because he used money to buy votes. Now this is a youth league. So I say, but where does a young fellow get money to buy votes? And she says, because he's a drug dealer. I mean, I was shocked myself, like you are. That a young fellow is a drug dealer gets enough money to be able to buy votes in a youth league. Now, I'm saying this, I'm raising this thing about the matter about what universities. I think it's important for us, you people are going to be leaders. As part of the process of your preparation for that leadership, I think you need to have an experience of the world as much as you can. It will be important to go to a university in China, to go to a university in America, to come to a university in South Africa. It helps. By the time you emerge out of all of that, you're a better person to be able to discharge the responsibility of leadership. It's good to have that kind of experience, I believe. So if there are any processes which enable you to have that kind of access, I would use those processes. I think this thing about being a leader, I really don't know what it takes. Because part of being a successful leader, I think, is being accepted by the people that you are their leader. Not by your self-proclamation, but what the people say. Now, how do you persuade the leaders, the people? How do you persuade the people to say that's our leader? I don't know. I think in the main, it would be because of what you do rather than what you say. It's your actions that will say to the people, this is a good person, fit for whatever role. I think basically, really, to be a leader is to let the ordinary people say, we are faced with these challenges. The way that we have seen this particular person act, we believe that this person can lead us out of these challenges. So I don't think there's a textbook which maybe there are textbooks, but I would never read them. Any textbook which says how to be a leader, it's fake. It's not. I don't think it's. You can. But in the end, you must end up in this position when the masses of the people say, we have got confidence in this person. They have the skill, they have the capacity, they have the integrity, they have got all of this. The apartheid was a bad system. This a system of racial domination, according to which a starting point, of course, must be that I am white, therefore I'm superior, and this one is black, therefore he's subhuman. That's your starting point. So I'm saying the system is bad, obviously. It's inhuman, it's a negative, it has a negative impact even on these ones who consider themselves to be superior. So in the end, the process of liberation is not only a liberation of the black oppressed, but it's a liberation of the white oppressor. Because suddenly they find, many South Africans, would say, you meet a professor from one of the Afrikaner universities, would say, when I think about what we used to do then, I really don't understand myself. Why was I so stupid? And to put pens into people's head to check whether they are what race and so on. Why did we do that? I'm saying it's a process of the liberation of the oppressor themselves. So they feel free now. They no longer have these constraints and behaving in wrong ways, inexplicable ways to themselves. So, of course, I think it would help the students a great deal if there's a lot that's written about apartheid and what happened, to read those books, to understand among other things, the psychology both of the oppressor and the oppressed. It's an important part of a human. How should human beings live? And how should human beings respond to situations? When you talk about human dignity, what are you talking about? When you talk about human agency, the capacity to act as a human being to change things for the better, what does that mean? But I'm sure that a study of this apartheid system and what happened to it would help. Would help. But in terms of actions by students, particularly in the context of what role do we play in society tomorrow, I think the best action to prepare for that is to pass very well. That is a very good foundation. Thanks.
Can we please appreciate His Excellency once again? Yes, you can rise. You can rise and appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Just before I welcome Mkonzi Dlamini on stage to give the vote of thanks, I just want you to know that there's an overflow of about 400 students in the multi-purpose hall, seated, streaming you live. So this is not all of us. We came together as a community to appreciate you and to honor you, sir. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Mkonzi. Mkonzi, please. Thank you. Okay, no problem.
Very warm greetings to His Excellency, President Thabo Mbeki, members of the royal family, members of the government, the governing council, of the media, all esteemed guests, and all of you ladies and gentlemen here today. It is with great honor and pride that I stand before you today, and I proclaim today to be a resounding success. And even though Africa Week is a student-led event, we are truly indebted to numerous individuals who have believed in us and trusted us to execute this job. We would like to extend our thanks to our students, teachers, supervisors, Ms. Fanela Chester, Ms. Abashle Dlamini, Ms. Lisa Smelane, the principal, and also to Mr. Walter Bennett, Mr. Mpiwa Dlamini, His Excellency's entourage, led by Mr. Pillay. We thank you for making this day possible. We also like to thank our sponsors, Eswatini Bank, Standard Bank, and KFC for for trusting us enough to execute this event. And we thank every single person who has played a role in making today possible. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to extend my gratitudes to a great man who, quite honestly, has been the primary source of my stress in these past several weeks. A great man who has stood here before us today and has allowed us the privilege to be enlightened by his wisdom. Exactly a year ago, I stood on this stage and I gave a TED Talk on what an African Renaissance would look like for the African people. Exactly a year later, on this same stage, you all got to experience the father of the African Renaissance. So it is safe to say that you have all experienced the real and original version of my speech. But truly, Your Excellency, thank you for making today possible. It is because of your words that we all understand in this room that we need to stop claiming as Africans that our journey is evolving. But we need to start taking actions into actually making that journey evolve. Because we have it in us as Africans to evolve the narrative of Africa from power to power, from summit to summit, and from greatness to greatness. Your Excellency, my words could never do justice to the gratitude we hold in our hearts as an Africa Week team and as a Waterford community for gracing us with your presence. I have no doubt in my heart that today will inscript itself on a very special page in the history books of Waterford Kamhlaba United World College of Southern Africa. We honor you and we thank you, sir. At this time, Your Excellency, would you be kind enough to come forward and receive an expression of our gratitude from our Governing Council Chairperson and from myself on behalf of the Africa Week team. At this point, Waterford Kamhlaba, would you join me and stand in appreciating His Excellency, President Thabo Mbeki, with a resounding round of applause.
Thank you so much, Mkonzi. Thank you so much to all teams involved, all teams highlighted, and even to those who are not mentioned. We appreciate you. At this very moment, we'd like to ask all students, staff, everybody in the room to be seated except the president's entourage. Standing as he leaves, sorry, pardon me. I'm not used to this, guys, I'm learning. And so we would like to ask that you all clap as he leaves with his entourage. And please remain stationary wherever you are, even in the MP hall. Please let there be a resounding applause for the president. Thank you, thank you, thank you.